they can all go to hell and I don't care. I said that from a pulpit in a major church a number of years ago. I referred to my friends who stand in shopping malls and weep for the lost. I don't even know their names. I don't know their problems. I don't know anything about them. I said on that occasion, and they can all go to hell, and I frankly don't care. I didn't say it in a bragging way. I said it in a confessional way. And it was true when I said it. But God's done something in my heart. Sometimes I sit in the malls and the tears well up in my eyes because they don't know. And they're so lost, and it's so very dark. I don't know what happened to me. Maybe it was Jesus, and maybe it was old age. Maybe it was God's Spirit drawing me to the place where God is concerned. Maybe because I had asked that I would weep where God weeps, that I would feel what He feels. And so I'm better. And I'm so sorry for what I said. In those days, I didn't understand the text we're going to study this morning. It's in 1 Corinthians, and it's the 9th chapter, and I'm going to start at the 19th verse, reading the words of Paul to you. I'll start in the 13th verse or 12th. Paul has just been talking about the rights that he has. Did you ever take any of those Bill Gothard seminars and they told you didn't have any rights? Now, there was some good stuff in that, but that was a lie. You got a lot of rights. And Paul enumerates some of those rights, and then he says, but I have not taken advantage of them. Looking at the second part of the 12th verse, nevertheless, we have not made use of this right, but we endure anything rather than put an obstacle in the way of the gospel of Christ. Do you not know that those who are employed in the temple service get their food from the temple, and those who serve in the altar share in the sacrificial offerings? In the same way, the Lord commanded that those who proclaim the gospel should get their living by the gospel. But I have made no use of these rights. Nor am I writing these things to secure any such provision, for I would rather die than have anyone deprive me of my ground for boasting. For if I preach the gospel, that gives me no ground for boasting, for necessity is laid upon me. Woe to me if I preach not the gospel. For if I do this of my own will, I have a reward. But if not my own will, I am still entrusted with a stewardship. What then is my reward? That in my preaching I may present the gospel free of charge, so as not to make full use of my right in the gospel. For though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them. To the Jews, I became as a Jew in order to win Jews. To those under the law, I became as one under the law, though not being myself under the law, that I might win those under the law. To those outside the law, I became as one outside the law, not being outside the law of God, but under the law of Christ, that I might win those outside the law. To the weak, I became weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some, and I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I might share in its blessings. Now, in just a moment, we're going to talk about evangelism and witnessing and the lost. But first, I want you to look at Paul, and I don't want you to miss his sin. Please note what he said. I would rather die than be deprived of the pride and the bragging that I can give to you doing this for free. One of the great dangers in the church is that we will put on a pedestal the writers of Scripture and make them perfect and inerrant. The Apostle Paul was a sinner. He was a sinner just like you, and while he put a spin on it after he said it, it was too late. The Freudian slip had already come out. Tonight, before you go to bed, read the 11th chapter of 2 Corinthians. Paul does some more bragging there. And in the middle of it, he says, I'm talking like a fool. I shouldn't be bragging like this. And then he goes on and he brags some more. And then you can read what he said to Timothy. It's a saying worthy of full acceptance that Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners, and I am the chief of sinners. And then you go to the 7th chapter of Romans, and the Apostle Paul confesses his sin in ways that no preacher ought to ever confess if he or she wants to keep his or her job. And so you need to understand that we get a glimpse of some of the pride in the bragging of Paul. And I don't care how spiritual he sounds after he said it, he already said it. That blows me away. The Apostle Paul, a sinner, badly in need of God's grace. I remember the time, and it was after I'd been here. I was living in Boston at the time. And I'd met a pastor I roomed with here at Coral Ridge at an EE week. And I was reading Barnhouse because I was brand new to this, and I was rejoicing in Barnhouse. And the pastor said to me, you knew he was unfaithful to his wife. And I said, no. He said, oh, yeah. So when I got back to Boston, I went to my mentor, John DeBrine, and I asked him about Barnhouse because Barnhouse had led John to Christ, and he said, no, it was a lie. And then he said, but he was a sinner. Don't get the idea he wasn't. He was always jealous of Billy Graham. And I said, no. And that was the beginning of my education and how I became a cynical old preacher. But Paul talking about bragging here is over the top. And when I read it, and I've taught this 10,000 times, it jumped off the page. And I said, I don't believe he did that. And the Holy Spirit says, that's you. And I said, no, it's not. I'm a humble guy. And I'm really authentic. Just ask anybody, and they'll tell you that. And then in my mind, I saw the reality of who I am. Just so you know, and maybe you already knew that, I write a lot of books. I have another one coming out soon. You say you need the money. Yeah, I do, but I don't get it. All of that money goes to the service of God's kingdom. I don't get a dime. And not only that, you pay preachers who come here pretty good. I don't get a dime for that either. That goes to the service of the kingdom. And I love to tell you that. I would rather die, not me, than deprive myself, oh no, Paul, but not me, of the reason I get to brag to you. And not only that, listen, self-righteousness is better than money, feels better. And not only that, I have delighted in just telling you what I just told you. And you say, Steve, that's neurotic. I know that. I was making a point. And I don't want to talk about it anymore. Now let's turn to the subject at hand. I came here for that evangelism explosion thing years ago, and I learned so much from Jim Kennedy. I remember the time he said, and I'd never thought about it before. He said, if you're saved, and if you're always saved, no matter what are you doing here? Why doesn't God, it would save a lot of hassle, why doesn't God just take you home to heaven right now? And then he said, the reason he doesn't is because of them. It really is, you know. I don't care where you go. I don't care what you do. I don't care how badly you screw it up. I don't care who you hurt or what you smoke or what you drink. He'll never let you go. You can be as sure of heaven right now because he promised as if you were already there, but you're here. You still struggle with your sin. You still have secrets you can't share. You still wake up at 2:00 in the morning afraid, no matter how beautifully, and the worship this morning was so good, Zach. You're still afraid. You still don't feel loved. You still wonder. But if you should die the second you're his, and you're home, and you're here for them. The Apostle Paul knew that. And that's what this text was written for. It was written for the people in Corinth, a bunch of wild people doing really bad stuff. But it was written for the people at Coral Ridge on Memorial Day Sunday, so that we might put it in our heads and our hearts and then our feet. So let me show you some things from this text, and then we'll be finished. First thing you ought to note from this text is that if you're going to be a servant of Christ and a servant of them, you ought to take note of the prerequisite for understanding. Paul said this, I become all things to all people. To the Jew, I became as one under the law. As one is free, I became as one free. As the weak, I became weak. That's a good thing, but there is something that goes before that, and that is you can't do that unless you understand the weakness of the weak and the pain of the wounded and the tears of the sorrowful. And so there is a point where you have to understand. I wrote a book a number of years ago, and it's on its 30th printing, I think. They republished it last year. It's called How to Talk So People Will Listen. And I have a friend who said that book was okay, not great, but okay. But you should have called it How to Listen So People Will Talk. That's what we got to do in the church. We're talking too much. Talking to him. I loved what Zach said. We don't have any answers. We don't know how to fix the world. We don't know how to fix ourselves. We don't know how to fix anybody. Do you know who I interviewed just 3 or 4 weeks ago? Jennifer Knapp. Most of you don't. Well, maybe you do. I may be the only person in the universe who didn't know who Jennifer Knapp was. She wrote a book about the pain she went through. You know what? You know about Jennifer Knapp? She was one of the premier Christian singers. But she was living a secret life as a lesbian. She came out, and then she left and slipped into darkness for almost 6 years. Oh, my. I didn't know who she was when our producer said, you're going to interview Jennifer Knapp. And I said, who? And he explained it to me. And I said, I don't feel very comfortable with that. And he said, well, it's scheduled, so you got to do it. I fell in love with her. You've joined the other side, Brown. No, I haven't. I still believe in biblical sexuality. I'm still clear and say often what I think about gay marriage. I still hold to the eternal verities of the Christian faith, but I saw Jennifer's tears and I listened. I saw her pain. I saw the struggle that she felt. We got to do that with the world. The reason we're here and they're there isn't because we don't have struggles or because we've conquered our sin or we don't have any secrets and so we don't have anything to hide. We go and listen so they will talk. We taste the salt of their tears. I don't know what's going to happen with Jennifer and Nat. She hadn't changed. But she was uncomfortable because she's his. We got to understand. You can't understand until you listen to the broken hearts of the lost. But there's more than that. There's also power in identification. Oh my. Look at what Paul said. I became what? I became weak to the weak. I got under the law and outside of the law. For those who are outside of the law, to the Romans. He became a Roman. To the Jews, he became a Jew. What's that called? That's called identification. Who taught Paul that? Jesus taught Paul that. George Buttrick was the pastor of Madison Avenue Presbyterian Church for 100 years. Most of you don't even know that name. He taught at Harvard. And in the early days when I was searching, he was one of the few who was screwed up but knew Jesus. And so I listened to his sermons sometimes. And he wrote a great book, God, Pain, and Evil. And in that book, he said that the one unique thing about the Christian faith, different from all other belief systems, is the fact that an awesome, omnipotent, omnipotent, eternal, infinite, holy, and righteous God became a man and identified with everything that we have experienced. Thou art great, and we're so small. Thou art infinite, and we are finite. Thou art eternal, and we tarry but just a little while. But with all of thy greatness and power, thou dost bend down low and listen to the sound of our tears as they strike the ground. That's from the rabbi's manual, and they don't know the rest. And your tears have mingled with our tears. Thirdly, you say, how many points have you got? Because my stomach is growling. I got 5. You can count. I hate it when pastors have eight points. That's one of the good things about smoking a pipe. It gets me through bad sermons. I think, you want to hear a funny story? I was preaching at a large church in Orlando, and I was talking about heaven. And I said, look, I'm going to use an illustration about my pipe, but don't write me letters. A lot of people, including my wife, more spiritual than you are, have tried to get me to stop, and they have failed, and you will too, so forget it. And then I said, smoking a pipe's kind of like heaven. If the faculty meeting is awful, and you think, I'm going to die, you think, when this is over, I can get a smoke. If the sermon's got 18 points and he's already spent 20 minutes on the first point, I think when this is over, I can get a smoke. And heaven's like that. Life is hard. It's not for sissies. And when it's over, the joy eye hath not seen, nor ear heard, nor the mind of man even thought about, what God has prepared for those who love him, called according to his purpose. You know what happened? I got letters you wouldn't believe. I mean, piles of letters. But the next time I preached there, I was standing at the door in the back of that big church, and guys were putting cigars in my pockets. I mean, I looked like I was wired with a bomb. I had these things sticking out of me everywhere. And just so you know, in case you're thinking, I don't believe he's saved, just so you know, as a result of that particular Sunday at that particular church, they started a men's Bible study, and it's going to this day. You know what it's called? Holy Smoke. And they meet every week and smoke cigars and pipes and study God's Word. Where was I? Oh, identification. That God has come and identified with us. Our problem is that we can be a lump of leaven. I mean, you got to go where they are, not to judge them or to beat them over the head, but to identify. You afraid? Me too. Do you want to be better? Me too. And I can't seem to get any better very fast. Do you think sometimes nobody loves you? Me too. Come with me. I know somebody who's got the bread. I know somebody who'll make a difference. Then look at the danger of agendas. The Apostle Paul says, I'm not even going, he made tents. He was a tent maker. He wouldn't accept a salary, and he bragged about it, which meant when he got before God, he lost the points he earned by not taking a salary. One time, Billy Graham was in church, and he put a $20 bill in the offering plate, and he meant to put a 10, so he reached to get it, and Ruth slapped his hand. And he said, but honey, I meant to put 10 in. And she said, in God's eyes, it is 10. So Paul lost the points that he got by bragging about it. But at minimum, he teaches us a principle that is so important. Get rid of the agenda. Get rid of the agenda. When my father was dying, and I loved him a lot, he's home now, but he wasn't a Christian but 2 or 3 months before he died. Doctor said, you're going to die. And I don't think you've got 3 months. We're going to pray. And then I'm going to tell you something more important than what I just told you. And he told my father, who never thought he was good enough, about Jesus who loves sinners. And I'm so grateful. My father said to me just a week before he died, son, I've played the angles all of my life, and I don't have any more angles to play. That's what we're supposed to be, people without angles, people without agendas, people who don't want anything. I went to hear Jerry Falwell. Now, I wasn't a part of all of that. Never could understand why everybody was so mad at that Baptist preacher. But my friend Bill Goralnik, who was then head of the American Jewish Committee, got some tickets to a thing where Falwell was speaking to all of the rabbis from all over America at one of the big hotels in Miami Beach. And so we snuck in, and I have a Christian ring on. I decided, looking around, because they were not happy that he was there, I thought, I'm going to take it off. I mean, I don't know. I don't want them to know I'm Gentile. And it wouldn't come over my knuckle, and I pulled it. And then I dropped it on the floor, and it rolled 2 pews in front of where I am. The meanest rabbi you have ever seen picked it up, looked at it, brought it back to me, and gave it to me. And I said, Lord, bless Falwell, because it's just me and him. And he did. Yet the question, I mean, their body language changed. And at the end, they had a question and answer period. And one of the rabbis stood up and said, Dr. Falwell, what do you want from us? He said, I don't want anything from you. I've got everything I need. And this has cost me to be here. Did you see the people that were picketing outside the hotel? You know why I'm here? Because I'm your friend. And even if you don't want me to be your friend, I'm going to be your friend. I'm here to say, I love you. And even if you don't want me to love you, I love you. He got a standing ovation. Why was that? Because he didn't have an agenda. They expected he would, and they were sure it was going to be political, but it wasn't. People without angles, people who don't have agendas. I don't care whether somebody's a Democrat. Now, I'm a conservative, a Republican, and I think Rush Limbaugh is a communist. But with that being said, I don't give a rip whether Democrats become Republicans, whether people get their act together, whether we fix everything that's wrong in the world. I just don't care, because I don't want an agenda. I want them to know I don't want anything. I just would like for them to see Jesus. And then note in the 16th verse, the motivation of necessity. Look what Paul says. Woe to me. In other words, I can't do anything but this. Woe to me if I preach not the gospel. I get that. At Key Life, my staff are preparing for DD Day. That's the day Steve drools or dies. I haven't done either one yet. I'm still here, and a lot of people wish I wasn't. I just want you to know I'm wounded, and I'm sinful, and I'm tired, and I'm afraid, but I'm not going anywhere. Because this is all I do until the day I die. I'd like to be proud of that, but I'm not. I just can't help it. And you shouldn't be able to help it either. You ought to say, Lord, make it so I smell like Jesus even when I don't want to. Make me your servant just by who I am, and fix it so I can't help it. He always answers yes to that prayer. And then go mingle with the dirty and the brokenhearted and the fearful and the lost. And then there's one other point, if you're counting. The favor of faithfulness. Look at the last verse in that text. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share with them in its blessings. There are two things that Paul's talking about. First, he's been faithful, and there's something to be said about that. Let me tell you something. Sometimes I'm faithful, sometimes I'm not. Sometimes I run, and sometimes I stay. Sometimes I do it right, and sometimes I do it wrong. But I sleep better when I do it right. Sometimes just before I go to sleep, I say, hey, Jesus, I did pretty good, didn't I? I was faithful today. And he said, yeah, you were. Go to sleep, child. I'll stay awake. That's better than self-righteousness. When you do it right, and we don't always, and he loves us anyway, but there's a reward there. That's what Paul's talking about. But he also says that he shares in the blessings, and the blessings are them. I love you guys. I can't imagine you not being here. I've experienced so much love in this place and acceptance. I had a young lady, Wendy. Did you see her? I don't know where she went. She probably left. But she came over and knelt where I was sitting. And she said, Mr. Brown, I was listening to one of your sermons. And I just want to say thank you. I went, oh, man. And I said, God must have told you to say that. And she said, yeah, he did. And I can't imagine you not being here. What does that make me thankful for? It makes me thankful for whoever it was who told you about Jesus. I rise up and call them blessed because God's putting a family together all over the world. And my brothers and sisters are something else. They laugh a lot. They forgive. They hug me when I don't deserve it. They dance and sing and we party a lot. And I'm so glad that they're there. And I'm so glad for the people who are faithful to send them to Jesus. And so, whoever did it unto you, I'm thankful for them. Because I get with Paul to share in the family blessings. A number of years ago, there was a sheep herder in Montana, had 4,000 sheep and an old violin. That's true. Loved classical music, and he had this old radio where he could pick up one classical music station. And the problem was the old violin. So he wrote the radio station and he said, look, I got this old violin and 4,000 sheep. And sometimes I like to play with you guys, but my violin is out of tune. Would you broadcast in your next concert the note A so I can tune this stupid thing? And that's what they did. The next week when they played the concert, they stopped everything. And they said, now the orchestra will play the note A for a sheep farmer in Montana. That's what we do. It's hard sometimes to speak the truth. It really is. And they don't like us. But when we identify, when we understand, when we don't have an agenda, the note is crystal clear. And if you listen to what I taught you this morning, you know why. You think about that. Amen.